All right, welcome everybody. It's November. It's a new week. We're going to start with something really instructive today. Last week, the week before, I talked about sort of the inherent difficulty of confronting these conspiracy theorists or conspiracy delusionists with the idea of, I'm just going to show them how each one of their claims is wrong, and that it's really difficult to do this in real time. I talked about a recent Sam Harris podcast episode where he outlines this very well when he's asked, what about having someone like Brett Weinstein on and arguing with him about each one of his points related to vaccines and ivermectin, et cetera. And Sam Harris very astutely pointed out, it's really easy to start 10 small fires, and if you can only put out 8 or 9 of them, it kind of ends up looking like you didn't really address this elephant in the room. There was a really good post on our subreddit which mentioned this and has a link to an interview that happened on Friday where Bill Maher interviews Sean Spicer. And this user Reflex Point actually says, Bill Maher versus Sean Spicer and why fact-checking conspiracy theorists in real time is a problem. David was recently mentioning Sam Harris's statement about why it can be dangerous to argue with conspiracy theorists in a live format, because if they just start gish-galloping a bunch of nonsense in real time, it can be difficult to come out of it looking like you won. And Sean Spicer does a perfect example of that when giving his reasons to question election integrity. He'll point to some obscure rule that changed in some battleground state and then claim it's suspect, and Bill is supposed to know about it, and if he doesn't, then Bill must be wrong in having confidence in the election results. So let's take a look. I'm going to play this 2.5 minutes uninterrupted. See if you can keep track of all the different assertions that Sean Spicer makes. I'm keeping track, and then we're going to go through them in a moment.
Yes. What about the election was rigged and Trump really won? Is that
I think
lunacy?
there are some serious problems with the election.
Here we go.
No, time out. Hold on.
What?
When you look at Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, Nevada,
yes.
The idea that we changed rules running up to an election in terms of how a ballot was counted, when it was counted, do you think Pennsylvania, the law signed by a Democratic governor in 2019, Act 77, signed by Governor Wolf, said that all ballots had to be in by 8 p.m.
There was a pandemic. That's why they
changed the law.
There was no time to do that.
No, there's never a time. So you should just
never.
take it.
Well, you would have. No, there wasn't. There wasn't.
There was plenty of time to pass legislation in all of these other areas.
This is a rabbit hole you want to go down to avoid the question, did Trump win or lose the election?
I don't know.
Well, there you go.
Because here's
the
problem.
world does.
If you first of all, tell me how many votes that got cast illegally and not according to the system. Who did they go for?
But this was litigated in every court. Even Republicans who were in charge of the vote came down on the side of this election was fairly adjudicated. You yourself said right after the election, they asked you about fraud.
They asked me if
you
have
said, I have seen no evidence.
Correct. I haven't. But what I have seen is a state. There's a difference.
So imaginary evidence?
No. There is a difference. What Pennsylvania's Supreme Court did, what Wisconsin's clerks did, they let people. Wisconsin does not have a provision in their law to let people vote early in person. It has an absentee ballot provision. People set up tables in parks in Madison, Wisconsin, and allowed people to come without identification. In Pennsylvania, they were allowed to vote without identification, no postmark on the ballot, in violation of Act 77 signed by a Democratic governor in 2019. And the answer is, well, then don't worry about it because it was a pandemic. Well, what's the next thing that you can just blow away? A law is a law until it's changed. You don't get to pick what you want to follow depending on what's happening outside.
Okay, this was looked at exhaustively.
It's not. That's not true, though. What was looked at? For example, in Wisconsin, the court ruled 4-3.
Okay, Sean, I get it. You know what?
You're like you accused me of something.
You said your piece. You said your piece. I haven't looked at this. You're like that kid in school
who's right.
No. No, who has to answer about the book report, so reads one page very carefully that nobody else read, and then does a thing on that, and then we don't know what you're talking about.
You do.
But we know that what I do know.
Okay, so that's a lot. So think about all of the different things that Bill Maher, in principle or in theory, had to be ready to refute and how difficult it is. Now, we've done it after the fact, but just look at how much time this is going to take me. So Sean Spicer mentions Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada, and says they changed rules leading up to an election. He mentions a 2019 Pennsylvania law signed by Governor Wolf that says ballots have to be in by 8 p.m. on election day. He's asked, did Trump win or lose? He doesn't know because he doesn't know the results in different states. He asks how many votes were illegally cast. He says the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the Wisconsin clerks changed rules, and Wisconsin has no provision to let people vote early in person, only absentee, and that there were parks just letting people vote with no ID. Pennsylvania allowed people to vote without ID and with no postmark on the ballot, and that violates Act 77. And then he mentions the Wisconsin court ruled 4-3. He doesn't actually say what they ruled or what the case was. So look at all of this different stuff we now have to deal with in order to simply say, hey, Trump lost, and that's it. On Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Nevada, he says, well, there were problems, and he just lists them. But he doesn't really explain what the problems were. In 2020, the results were Biden 303 and Trump 235. If you flip all three of those states, Trump gets the 270 votes he needs. But that's if you flip all three. Let's say Sean Spicer is right, but about two of those three states, and what he's right about actually means that Trump won two of those three states. Biden still wins the election in that case. So even at its face, he's throwing out three states as if Trump probably won them just to demonstrate that in one of those, Trump actually won. Would be a Herculean effort for which there's no evidence. But if you only are able to successfully demonstrate Trump really won two of those three, Biden still wins that election. So that's a real red herring. Second, rules changed leading up to the election. Some states did change election procedures without legislation, but that's no big deal. We've studied this already. I already told you, Rebecca Green, election law professor at College of William and Mary, said, it's often the case that election statutes have gaps that don't account for particular situations like the pandemic. So just because a decision was made not from the legislature, it was made by the governor's office or a public health board or whatever, that's really not a big deal. Spicer asserts that it happened as if that's a problem. It's not actually a problem. It's common. Many states also changed election rules because of the pandemic. Blue states and red states did it. States that Trump won did it, and states Biden won did it. And big shocker, these Republicans only ever talk about the fact that states Biden won did it. North Dakota changed rules due to the pandemic, not through the legislature leading up to the election. So did Arkansas. So did Texas. They all made state changes in that way. Trump won those. They don't make a peep about those. Then Spicer mentions a 2019 Pennsylvania law signed by Governor Wolf, which says ballots have to be in by 8 p.m. It's true that Pennsylvania law did require ballots to be in by 8 p.m. on election day. But before the 2020 election, the state Supreme Court of Pennsylvania extended the deadline so ballots could be received by mail until 5 p.m. on the Friday of election week, if they're either postmarked by election day or have a missing or illegible postmark. They did a new deadline. It was dealt with. The Pennsylvania Supreme Court dealt with that. Now, if Sean Spicer wants to argue the Pennsylvania Supreme Court is illegitimate in so doing, that's a different argument. But it's been dealt with in a legal way that is accepted as a valid way to change when absentee ballots can be received. Then Spicer says, well, how many votes were illegally cast? It's such a vague question, it's meaningless, because his definition of illegal might be it was received after 8 p.m. on election day in Pennsylvania. But as I told you, the state Supreme Court already dealt with that. So what does he really mean by illegal votes? Wisconsin, he says, had no provision to let people vote early in person, only absentee. Well, Wisconsin didn't used to permit early in-person voting, but then they decided to in 2021. They can do that. He says, well, the clerks decided. The clerks have the authority to decide that. They decided it legally and changed that rule. It's not actually a red flag the way he says. And then lastly, he mentions the Wisconsin court ruled 4-3, and he doesn't tell you what they ruled. Well, I looked into it. The conservative-led Wisconsin Supreme Court ruled 4-3 not to throw out 220,000 ballots that the Trump campaign wanted thrown out. Spicer mentions it. Look, the Wisconsin court ruled 4-3. Yeah, but what did they rule? It was a conservative majority Supreme Court which decided you can't just throw out these 220,000 ballots. So each of these things, when you analyze them, is really nothing. It's not a smoking gun. It's not a red flag. But if you watch the 2.5 minutes I played for you, it might seem like Bill Maher didn't really refute everything. And this is exactly the challenge that Sam Harris has recently talked about when asked, why aren't you debating more of these vaccine skeptics or ivermectin advocates or whatever? Because they show up and they go, wait a second, you didn't see the Bangladeshi study, which showed whatever? No, I didn't see it. Oof, wow. And you think you know what's going on? The Bangladeshi study may be something, it may not be something. Really good example. Glad that it was posted to our subreddit. One of our sponsors is called Privacy. Privacy is a totally free service that I've been using for years. Privacy lets me create virtual payment cards with one click, and when I use the virtual card, the money is taken out of my bank account. You can create multiple cards, delete them, freeze them, set a spending limit on them. Let's say I'm signing up for a free trial and it requires a credit card. Privacy will autofill a virtual card number, and then after signing up, I can delete that virtual card. So I know I'm not going to be charged again. Something really useful and very practical. Or let's say I'm ordering food over the phone, but I left my wallet somewhere. I don't have my real credit card on me. I can use a virtual card on my Privacy mobile app. But really the best part is you're not out there exposing your real credit card number, so you're not as susceptible to data breaches and identity theft. Privacy is a totally free service, and you'll get $5 to spend when you go to privacy.com/Pacman. The link is right underneath this video.